right, I will go ahead and get things started. Welcome again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Resume Reinvention Masterclass with Lynee Alves. My name is Allison, and I'm an Info Services Librarian at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library, and I'm joined by my colleague and AHML Business Advisor, Diane. For more programs to keep you entertained and informed, visit our programs calendar at ahml.info. Our November Jobs program, How to Successfully Navigate the Flexible and Remote Job Market, is on Friday, November 13th. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Lynee Alves. Lynee is an expert resume writer and successful career coach. She helps individual clients effectively position their skills and experience, and also provides guidance on job search and mindset strategies and interviewing skills. Lynee developed her skills during her 29-year career in corporate America. She recruited, interviewed, and hired top talent at Fortune 50 and 500 companies, as well as a startup company that went global. Lynee was also a very successful job candidate herself, securing 5 director-level roles in 7 years. She knows what employers want to see and hear, and she loves sharing what she knows so that others can have more productive and successful job searches and career transitions. Lynee is currently serving as the resident career coach for CBS 2 Chicago and works with the news team to create weekly segments focused on job search tips and strategies for consumers. Lynee received her degree in broadcast journalism from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she is a member of the Chicago Writers Association and the Arlington Heights Chamber of Commerce. And with that, I will turn it over to Lynee.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you to the Arlington Heights Memorial Library for asking me to present this evening. I'm really happy to be here with all of you, and I'm happy to be sharing, like Allison said, my knowledge on resumes and everything that I can related to job search. So tonight, obviously, our focus is going to be on the resume because that is obviously where people start with their whole process, or if they're midway through a search, it's often a focal point for people as they're navigating their search, wondering, is my resume in good shape? You know, why am I not getting responses, or why do I get responses? People don't always understand. So I'm here to try and pull back the curtain of and let you see behind the scenes and help you understand the best practices that you can follow to have a really solid resume. So as Allison said, I won't spend too much time on this. I am president at Interview Like an Expert. I started my own company after a 29-year career in corporate America. And I have over 20 years of experience recruiting, interviewing, and hiring candidates. I love the work I do with CBS 2. They have been a wonderful partner since we started working together this past May during COVID, and we continue to work together. And I also work with clients one-on-one and in group kind of environments, and help them with resume rewrites, LinkedIn profile rewrites, job search strategies, career transitions, and one of my very favorite things, interview coaching, which I've done a lot of the last few weeks and had great results with. So all of these things I really have found to be really enjoyable. So tonight, we're going to talk about resumes, but let's start a little bit by talking about some of the current employment challenges. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know, so we'll go through this quickly, but as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a big spike in unemployment, as you all know, and there are even more people applying for available jobs. So now you're not only competing with those people who are also unemployed, and which is a larger group these days, but also with people who are currently employed, and maybe they're unhappy in their current role, or they're just ready to move on to their next opportunity. Maybe their current company doesn't have a next level role for them, or they're not being seriously considered for it. I deal with clients every day. Despite the current circumstances, many people I work with are currently employed and looking to navigate to their next role. So definitely work with a mix of people, employed and unemployed. So let's talk about resumes, and one thing that really impacts resumes, and that's what I'm calling the rise of the bots. 98% of Fortune 500 companies and a growing number, a large number actually, of small and mid-sized businesses filter resumes through an applicant tracking system, or an ATS. This is something that they do before someone in their organization even takes a look at your resume, if they ever do. And I don't mean for that to sound doom and gloom. The reality here, where I'd like to start, is to have you understand that there are two sides to every coin, which I'm sure you are well aware of, right? When we're candidates, it's very difficult to understand, why am I not hearing from a company when I've applied and I'm qualified? But over the years, because of technology, because of electronic resume submissions and applications, companies are now more inundated than ever with applicants for open roles. And again, you can multiply that by a few times because of COVID. So we've got this really challenging environment where candidates are frustrated, where companies are overwhelmed in some cases with an explosion, a tsunami of applicants for any given role. And it's very difficult for them to navigate that. So this is one thing that we're having to contend with. So I want to spend a little bit of time this evening, before we speak about the actual resume formatting, which I'm definitely going to be talking about. I want to talk about applicant tracking systems because I feel like many candidates are very frustrated by them and very and don't entirely know the ins and outs of them. And I want to help kind of clarify some things about it. So applicant tracking systems can also be referred to as talent management systems. Employers are using these systems, this software, to process job applications, to possibly administer screening questions for people who apply for roles, to conduct applicant testing, which is sometimes needed for a various role, right? Sometimes people have to take some kind of an aptitude test, whether it be like math for a financial position, could be a typing test for certain roles. You just never know. And they are, tracking applications, of course, from various online posting sites, including their own website. So these systems can be used for an awful lot of things. So you want to think primarily of an ATS system as a database that's used to organize and manage candidate applications for any open position. So for many of you, certainly those who are maybe in my age group, right? I'm 54. In my day, we mailed our resume in to a company. And when I was a hiring manager, my HR department got these mailed in resumes from the job posting that we put in the newspaper, not online. And that pile of resumes, or multiple piles of resumes, came onto my desk. And I think there are many candidates, because I continue to work with them one-on-one, who kind of envision this as the world that people still operate in, but it isn't, right? Everything is done electronically. And so that's why I want to talk about this tonight, just to make sure everybody's clear that companies, when you're applying electronically, they're not printing every resume out and putting it on somebody's desk to review, unfortunately. And that's what makes this process a little bit more challenging these days. Now, applicant tracking system software was designed to help human resources personnel to more easily identify qualified candidates for active job postings. And yet what I just said a moment ago, sort of the opposite of that, right? The intention here was to think, well, we can leverage technology in order to find qualified candidates more easily. But my best guess is that many companies and and even the software companies could not have envisioned the significant change, right, in the job search process, which is now really all technology driven, which just has meant a surge in candidates, and employers just aren't very well equipped to handle that. And there's a few good reasons why. In many cases, companies brought these systems on, excuse me, because they had reduced the sizes of their human resources or recruitment teams, right? So, over the years, right, I had a 29-year career in corporate America. And certainly, what you often see in corporate environments and business environments in general is that any role that is not a revenue producing role can be one that's a little bit at risk, meaning that they might consolidate roles, blend roles together. So this is certainly what we had seen happen in the human resources discipline over the years. We've seen those roles reduced, and we've seen roles change too. And my most recent company, I was most recently employed at Comcast a few years back. Our human resources contacts and assigned people for our teams, they were business partners. They weren't going through resumes, right? So all of this has been moved over significantly to technology, which presents some challenges for candidates, no question about it. Now, this software has great appeal because it uh, promised to make the search for talent, of all the applications, more efficient and more cost effective for businesses. But again, I know that if you're a candidate, it's highly likely that you are frustrated with applicant tracking system software and how it works. There's, first of all, frustration with auto rejections. So let me take a moment to talk about that. So this is when you are, you know, find a job online, you apply for that job. That might mean uploading your resume. It might mean re-inputting your resume into some other kind of format. It might mean cutting and pasting every bit of your resume even though you have it attached. I know that's a little crazy, but that's what we deal with. So you do all of this work and you hit submit and you're like, oh gosh, I got over that hurdle of applying for that job. And within minutes sometimes you'll get an auto rejection. And so what this means is that software has, scanned something and they've got some parameters set up in the background that none of us are going to know what those are, right? Except for the people at those companies who've set them up. They've scanned your resume, they've scanned it against the job requirements, whether those are minimum education requirements, whether those are specific titles they're looking for. Oftentimes, businesses these days are looking for applicants who have very recent current experience in the specific type of role they're applying for. So let's say you were previously a marketing manager. If your resume, and you've been a marketing manager for years, right? Let's say, maybe at a couple of different organizations. So your resume is certainly oriented to that, and your title is oriented to that. So in an ideal world, if you're applying for a role that says marketing manager, you're going to have a better chance of being a match simply based on title. Title is really important. And that's something that I certainly could talk much more about, but there are nuances to this, right? Sometimes the title we have at a company and the title that's on our resume might not be the title that every other company in the marketplace uses for that role. I had a gentleman I worked with a couple years ago who was laid off from AT&T, and he was a project manager. But whatever the title was, and I wish I had taken a picture of it because I can't remember, but it made no sense to me as a hiring manager, and it certainly didn't indicate to me that he was a project manager. And so I advised him and told him, Tony, you need to change your title on your resume. I know this wasn't your official title at AT&T, but the reality is that nobody else in the marketplace uses the title that AT&T used. So you need to make an adjustment on your resume to make sure that it's a fit for those roles that you're applying for. So that's a simple tip that I can share with everybody here. And that's why I'm talking about this, the applicant tracking systems before we dig into the resume content itself, because there are things like that that you may need to consider as a candidate. Little tricks, little nuances, little things you may need to change or adjust on your resume that are not untruthful, right? We're not making him a vice president, but we are creating a different title for him on his resume because his given title at his company simply doesn't compute, doesn't translate for the available roles in the marketplace that he's looking for. Now, by the way, the good news is he got a new job, and this was a gentleman who had, I think, like 27 years at AT&T. So he was certainly further on in his career, and I know he was uncomfortable. He hadn't looked for a job outside his company for 27 years. But making that change was certainly one thing that absolutely helped his candidacy. So another frustration that exists with applicant tracking system software is this complaint that I'm never getting called. for a role that you feel is a solid match for your skills and experience. So if we continue on with my marketing manager, um, example, let me just share with you some reasons why you might not get called, even if you are literally a perfect fit. And I know this isn't what people want to hear, but I want to help you understand why this may be happening. And I'm also going to talk to you today about some strategies you might be able to leverage um, that can help you get around this frustration. So if you're a marketing manager and you've applied for a number of roles, and on paper, on your resume, your experience, let's say they want 5+ years of experience. You have more than 5 years experience. You have 8 years of experience in marketing. Great, you check that box. They also are asking for certain characteristics, skills, personal characteristics, and experience specific to the role that you have. So let's say everything kind of aligns and you look at this job posting and you look at your resume and you think, wow, this is very, actually, you look at the posting and you say, this is very much aligned with what I do. So let me change this a bit. You send your resume in and you don't hear back. There's a few things that could be at play here. Sometimes when I'm dealing with candidates one-on-one, they are saying, I'm a perfect fit for this role. We look at the job posting, and what is in the job posting might be specific items that are described that this candidate has actually done and has experience in, but sometimes those things are not on their resume. So what I think people may not always be aware of is it's very important to highlight specific things that you've done that are relevant to the type of role you're looking for. So if you're looking in general for marketing manager roles, I would invite you to pull 2, 3, maybe 4 maximum job postings. Read those job postings, highlight them, and see what words or phrases or skills or requirements come up consistently across all maybe 3 or 4 postings. Then I want you to cross-reference that information with your resume. I want you to see, is that information something that I'm highlighting on my resume? Am I doing a good job of letting them know that I have these skills, that I know how to do this, or that I have experience doing this? Maybe, maybe not. So that's one reason why you may not hear from somebody. The other reason is something I alluded to a few minutes ago, and that's really just the volume of applications. Now, I don't have any specific knowledge, though I'm going to be trying to meet with somebody in HR to dig into this with them. But many people feel like they want to be among the first to apply to a job, and they're hoping, again, in the old days, I think that was pretty effective. But in today's day and age of electronics, I'm not sure if any companies actually sort that way or not, but I want to get to the bottom of that with somebody who's actually engaged in that and really much closer to it than I am. But I want you to know that when people have a lot of applicants, I did speak to an HR leader last summer, not this summer, but a year ago last summer. And this woman used to be an HR leader, senior HR leader at CNN in Atlanta. So lots of great experience. Well, now she's working freelance and has her own business. And she worked with a client and they posted a role for an operations manager or director, I believe it was, on Indeed or one of the major job boards. She told me that this was last summer, this was pre-COVID. So I just want to put that out there. 2,000 applications, 2,000 applicants for this one role. She was blown away because this was not something she had experienced back in her corporate days. And so she explained to me that this is the process they went through. She's like, Lynee, we could not possibly go through all 2,000 resumes and review them. We just don't have the time or the manpower. So what we did is we went through until we identified maybe 10 qualified candidates. And then once we identified 10 qualified candidates with resumes on paper, right, we then moved into calling them and starting to do screening interviews and moving through the interview process. So to get to 10 qualified resumes, I'm not sure how many they had to go through, but my guess is, maybe not, I can't imagine more than 100. Maybe if we're being really generous, 200. So that would be 10% of the total applicant pool at that time. So if we know that today we've got more competition, because of higher unemployment, it's that much more challenging. So I say this because I want you to understand that on the company side, on the HR side, talent acquisition, recruitment side, there are very real challenges. And I promise you that those people in those roles do want to get the best person for the job, but they're overwhelmed and trying to figure out how to do that most effectively. Now, I know that's not your problem, but I'm going to help you figure out what you can do to impact that. So let's talk about that. What can you do as a candidate? Well, like I mentioned earlier, I talked about writing your resume for your experience a moment ago. So I want to be really clear. A lot of candidates will say, I need help getting my resume through an applicant tracking system. So I want to hire somebody, let's say a resume writer, to help me do that. Now, I will tell you, if somebody tells you they can do that, I'm not so sure that's something that anybody can guarantee. It's quite difficult, and here's why. Think about the fact that every job that you're applying for is at a different company, right? So there's different postings, and there are a lot of different applicant tracking system software packages out there. So every company isn't using the same software. Like I said, some smaller and mid-sized companies may be using what's available to them with a site like Indeed or ZipRecruiter. They don't even have their own software. But for the companies who do, every company is programming the back end of that differently. Many people assume that what's programmed into the back end of that system is the job description that you're applying to. And that may be the case, but it also may not be the case. We just don't know. You could have the job description plus a whole bunch of other keywords and phrases plugged into the back end. You could have not the job description in there, right? Maybe they don't load the job description in and they just do all the other stuff, right? Soft skills and specific qualifications and requirements. It could be a mix of the two. It's really hard to know. So when when anybody, I should say, wants to try and optimize their resume to an applicant tracking system, you really can't do it because every job posting is different. So my recommendation to you, and I have done this numerous times, hundreds of times with my clients, is to optimize your resume to be the best it can be in terms of representing your professional experience, your skills, your experience, what you bring to the table in your discipline, and of course, having it relate to what you're seeing in these job postings that are for your discipline. So that's the most important thing that you can do. And that allows you to ideally have one resume that you're not tinkering with nonstop or tinkering with every time you apply for a new job. That is not a strategy, in my opinion, that will pay dividends. I have consistently seen people who get caught in that, and I understand why, right? People are trying to figure out, how can I get better results? And sometimes that idea of adjusting my resume and changing it is really a piece that drives them. But I can tell you, I've never seen anybody get great results that way. I consistently see people who are very grounded and rooted in their professional positioning. They get the best results because they are 100% clear about what they're looking for and about what their skills and experience are, and they have them very clearly laid out on their resume document. So here's the key takeaways. We know the job market is flooded with candidates, especially for more desirable roles. Technology is being leveraged at every step. Now, I just spent a whole lot of time on online applications and ATS software, but we also have LinkedIn, we have video interviews, and more. Technology is everywhere throughout this process, even more so now during COVID. And let's be honest, something I didn't talk about a whole lot, but that I know is true, again, referencing the fact that I'm in my mid-50s, this process has changed significantly over the past several years, past 10 years. And it can feel very overwhelming to job seekers, especially those who have not looked for a job in the last 10 years. I speak to people all the time who tell me, I've been in my company for this long, and oh my gosh, this whole process has changed completely since the last time I had to look for a job. Or I hear a lot, gosh, I had such good luck where, people recruited me for roles and brought me into my jobs along the way. I've not had to look for a job in a really long time, but now I do, either because I've been laid off or because maybe I don't see an opportunity for somebody to, grab me and pull me along into that next new opportunity. So people are really aware of the fact that now I've got to figure this out. And it feels overwhelming. But let's, simplify the resume process today, because I want to talk about why your resume is so important. Again, I know many of you know this. I know that almost everybody who starts in working with me starts with the concept of, I need help with my resume, right? So why is it so important? Well, it's the foundational tool of your job search, right? Everything builds off of your resume, absolutely everything. It's your professional branding tool. Your resume is actually promoting the brand called you. You are a brand in this case. And so you have to really consider, this is a little bit of a marketing exercise. And I understand everybody's not a marketing expert, so I'm going to help you today with how to create a resume that is compelling and powerfully positioned and is going to help support a more successful, productive, and positive job search. In today's competitive environment, the truth is it is more important than ever to have a great resume that offers a strong summary of you, your skills, and your experience. And it should be aligned with the roles you are applying for. Like I mentioned, employers are looking for candidates who have recent and relevant experience for the jobs that they are recruiting for. So let's dig in and talk about the resume formatting and layout and content. So here is a gorgeous example of what a resume should look like. Now, this is page 1. I'm going to show you page 2 in a moment, but I want you to just notice a few basic things. This is just black and white. It's type on a page. There is not a lot of formatting. There's not any there are not any graphics here, very minimal formatting. You're going to see some lines when I go in for close-ups later. You'll see bullet points. But other than that, this is very clean, very easy to read. And as a hiring manager for 20 years, I can tell you, this is what hiring managers want to see. They want to see something that is very easy to navigate, very clearly written, because they want you want to make it easy for them to read through and to understand what a great candidate you are, right? So that is part of your job in getting a resume together, whether you choose to do that on your own or whether you choose to hire somebody to do that for you. More and more people are choosing to have somebody write this. I just recently actually had a woman who's a communication director hire me to write her resume because she's like, I'm too close to it. So she's a writer and she had trouble editing herself. So everybody is challenged with this. I just want everybody to know here that that this is not something that everybody can do at the same level. So don't beat yourself up if you found it difficult. It is difficult. It's difficult for me. I want you to know that what goes into a resume in terms of hours typically is anywhere from 4 to 6 hours of time going through experience, writing, editing, formatting, right? All of the things. It's really intensive work for just one resume. So that's page 1. You can see that we've got the professional summary up top, key strengths and skills, professional experience. And then on page 2, the professional experience continues. And then we've got a couple of extra sections, technical skills and proficiencies, and education. So I'm going to go through these section by section for you, just to kind of walk you through what are some best practices. So before I do that, I'm going to talk about some not so good practices. I want you to understand why some of these resumes that I'm sharing with you now are not resumes that you would want to use layouts, that you would want to use for your resume. Now, every one of these 3 that I'm going to share with you came from a site called Canva. Many of you may be familiar with Canva. Canva is an amazing site, and I use it and for social media posting and for creating really good looking materials, whether they are online or intended for print. Really, really great templates that they provide. Unfortunately, I would tell you that as a 20-year recruiting manager and now as a career coach, these are not layouts that are going to help you. First of all, you should not have a photo on your resume. In this day and age, certainly, while it's nice, right? In theory, we think, oh, that's great, like social media, let's put our photo there. This, by the way, looks beautiful. This particular resume on screen, it's just not practical. Certainly, there can be discriminatory practices, and so having a photo on your resume could work to your advantage. It could work to your disadvantage. So photos are not recommended. And I don't think that companies want photos either because they would be worried about bias that could be exhibited by anybody who's involved in that interview process. So best to stay away from them. You can see we've got a 2-column format here. On the left side, we've got these headers that say all about me, accomplishments, contact and core skills, and then experience and education on the right. This is not really very friendly to an applicant tracking system software because it's scanning from left to right. Now, technically, listen, we know that computers are quite smart, software is quite smart. Can it parse everything properly? Probably, but some of the programs probably can't. So sometimes people's information is getting all jumbled about if it's getting scanned through that software. So this format, not really so friendly to the software. What I showed you a moment ago, so simple because it's logically organized, kind of like in the way that you would expect content to be organized. So that software can easily scan it, read it, ingest it, and then parse it and store it the way it's meant to be stored. The other thing here, you may not be familiar with this term, but reverse type. That's the white type on a colored background. That's also not going to be very ATS friendly. So these are things we want to stay away from. Similarly, we've got another layout here available on the site with the text-oriented, up and down instead of horizontally, right? Vertically instead of horizontally. That's not very friendly to a system. And what I want you to notice about this, and even if I go back to this one, there's not very much room on the page for you to put much content. And that's not a good thing. You don't want to cram a ton of content. There certainly is a happy medium. You do need to edit, but you certainly don't want to have such minimal information showing. So here's another example. Now this one looks a little bit better, right? It's type on a page, but we've got color going on, and that's a no-no. Again, this is, the way people think when they think back to the old days of people sending resumes in, they will be thinking, well, maybe if I have color, that'll help my resume stand out. But if everything's electronic, you're really not helping your resume stand out by leveraging color. I don't recommend icons, as you can see here on the left side, and you can see there's this graphic representation of skills in the lower left corner that is frankly kind of confusing to me. And so I wouldn't recommend using anything like this. And again, you can see there's almost no content on this page. Now, maybe for a high school student, maybe even for a college student, although my son's in college and I've done his resume and his looks just like the one I just saw shared with you, although it is on one page. You really want to kind of go with a more traditional format is the truth. That is what is easiest for hiring managers and recruiting managers to deal with. So let's talk about what you want to have on your resume. You want to have a clean header. That's your name. You can see that's in big bold type there. And I'm going to go through these in detail. And then some basic information underneath. You also want to have a professional summary. Again, for those of you who may be further on in your career, you may, like I remember, you may remember that the old format included something called an objective. The objective is no longer current best practice for resume formatting. The new expectation is that you will have a professional summary. Then we highlight some key strengths and skills, and you can see that this is all in a clean and easy to navigate format. And then we've got your professional experience, and this is all very ATS friendly. So let's talk about best practices. Talked about the fact that it really does need to be in a clean and updated format. So what does that mean? One way to update the look of your resume, believe it or not, is with the font that you use. And it's recommended that you use a sans serif font. Sans is French for without. So without serifs. So just to illustrate for you, the serif font is there in the middle, and that's Times New Roman. And I'm quite certain that my old resume many years ago was done in Times New Roman. This was one of the most popular fonts at that time. And a serif is just the little decorative element there that you see on the ends of the letters, right? And the font at the bottom is Calibri, and that is a sans serif font, no serifs on that font. It's a cleaner font, and it just looks a little bit more modern without looking over the top modern. Some other sans serif fonts you might be familiar with would be Helvetica or Arial are other popular ones, but Calibri is actually recognized as one of the most, most attractive sans serif fonts, and is one that many people use and recommend for resumes. So I certainly recommend that to you, and I use it on all of mine. I also want to recommend that you create a very clean header. Your information should be very easy to digest. You want to include your LinkedIn URL, especially if you are in any kind of a profession where, like in a business or corporate environment. Listen, even if you're in a job that might be, not where it's not required that you network, it still looks good. If you're in an administrative role, if you're in a more entry level role, staff role, you don't have to be a senior person to be using LinkedIn effectively. Building a network there is a really great practice. So you want to highlight the fact that you're on the site, and you want to create an engaging and well-written professional summary. And this is challenging. You have to really try and be very thoughtful and intentional about what you include there and what you don't include there, because you don't want to write a very long summary. And then also you want to highlight your key strengths and skills. So let's look at the header, the professional summary, and the key strengths and skills specifically. Now, stick with me. I'm going to go over this from top to bottom. So you can see I've used Calibri font throughout here. We've got a clean headline layout. At the top, we've got the name in big bold letters. You no longer need to put your full address on your resume. You can simply have your city and state. Your phone number should be a number where you're easily reachable. For many people these days, most people, that's going to be a cell phone number. You do not need, if you have two numbers, you don't need home and cell. Just put one number, the number that you would most likely be reached at. And normally that's a cell phone number. An email, and I do recommend that if you have a like an antique email address like AOL.com or Hotmail.com, you do want to update to something like Gmail or Ymail, Yahoo Mail, or maybe even like from your internet service provider. If that's Comcast, Comcast gives you an email, the ability to set up emails on the Comcast.net address. So you have opportunity to update your email. I recommend you do, because an old email can date you. And then there you can see the LinkedIn vanity URL. Now, if you don't know how to create that, I'll talk later about some resources that I've got there, but you can certainly go on LinkedIn and just search their help to say, how am I going to just search LinkedIn URL, and you'll be able to figure out how you can truncate your current URL, because the default is a URL that has a bunch of random numbers and letters at the end, and that does not look good on a resume. So again, I see many people who have that on their resume because that's what it is, and they don't know that they can change it, but you can. So let's look at the professional summary here. You've got let's see, what do I have here? 6 lines. I mean, typically I write these at anywhere between 4 and 6 lines. That's it. And this is not super small font. So by the way, when I say that you want to, write something brief and edit, sometimes people think, well, let me just shrink that font size and cram some more information on the page. But again, remember, what you want is information that can be easily ingested by the person who's reading it. You want everything that you write or that somebody writes for you to make sense and to sell you, right? So you can see here, there's some great content. Experienced operations manager with a consistent record of performance and achievement in fast-paced environments. Skilled at leading, motivating, and coaching team members in order to support company objectives. You can hear there are little ideas that I got across, right, when I wrote this summary. I'm letting them know, hey, I support the company. Hey, I operate in fast-paced environments. Little things that you can drop in that just elevate you as a candidate. So writing a really strong professional summary or having one written for you is a really important thing. Then figuring out what are those key strengths, key skills that you bring to the table as a candidate and highlighting those below. Now, sometimes people have a laundry list of them. My standard practice is to have 9 in 3 columns, just like you see here. That's plenty. Very occasionally we'll do more, but really typically, again, less is more. So highlight the most important things and try not to get sucked into the trap of highlighting everything. Because when everything's important, right? There's a saying that says, when everything's important, nothing's important, right? So it's our job when we're marketing ourselves to highlight those most important qualities that we bring to the table and our true strengths, right? You won't be strong in everything, but there are going to be things that you are especially skilled at, and those are the ones that you want to highlight here. So now let's move on to your professional experience. Want to ensure that your professional experience is also very clearly written and includes, and this is really important, your results and accomplishments that would be of value to a next employer. That's so important. Employers don't know what you've done. And since it's like we know that, getting through to that interview is a big deal and a challenge. So you want to highlight some things that you've done that are specific to your discipline and that would be valued by somebody else. If they knew you could do this at your old company, that they would be excited about that and excited about potentially bringing you into their company. For those more experienced candidates, I do also want to highlight that your dated experience, that means the experience on your resume with dates attached, only needs to go back 20 to a maximum of 25 years, preferably closer to that 20-year mark, depending on where those jobs break, because you don't want to date yourself and you don't want to be discriminated against. So you can add other content. I'll talk about that in a moment, but just with no dates. So let's look at professional experience. There's a few things here I want to highlight for you. Again, top to bottom, you can have an optional company summary. Now, if you work at a company like Facebook or Citibank or Macy's, you don't need a company summary because everybody kind of knows what those companies are. But if in this case, this gentleman worked at a company that wasn't a well-known name brand. And so we wrote a very short 2-line, not even a full 2 lines summaries. Typically I'll look on a website to see, what's a good summary, something very, very minimal, not a lot of detail, but something that at least will help somebody else, a junior recruiter all the way up to the most senior level VP who might read your resume. They'll be very clear on where you worked and what you did. For your experience, you'll see on the right that I only use years in job. I do not put months and years. I just think it's a cleaner look. And by the way, this also helps you if you have employment gaps. So if you have some time off in between jobs, sometimes just moving to years on your resume is helpful. Now, of course, on applications, they do ask for month and year. So maybe you want to keep track of that somewhere else, but you don't need to have it on your resume. It's not a requirement. And you can see it really cleans it up. Next, you can also have an optional role summary. Again, if your title is project manager or whatever, you don't have to have a role summary. And in fact, in this case, this summary could also just be the first bullet point. We just chose to do a summary in this case because for consistency's sake, we did it with the company, we did it with the role. Again, his title was one that isn't super common. So I wanted to be very clear about what he did in his role. And then I want to point you to the accomplishments. Like he saved the company $535,000 in base rent insurance and taxes by consolidating some warehouses. He achieved an average increase of 10% or greater on safety scores through communication and enforcement of corporate safety policies. Doesn't that sound great? That sounds like somebody you want to hire. So you can see that there's a lot of specific information here, but you can see there's a lot said, but it's not a ton of stuff crammed on the page. You'll even notice, I actually do on a lot of resumes, play with the spacing even in between lines and add a little air in between, a little white space. So for single spacing, sometimes I do a little bit more than single spacing, like 1.1. or 1.2, depending on the resume. It just makes this so easy to read. So that's really important. So again, as candidates, sometimes we can get very caught up in this idea that I have to tell them everything that I've ever done and put it all down on paper. But the truth is, that's not what the company wants, or the recruiter or the hiring manager. They want you to tell them the most important things that are going to be the things that matter to them in terms of hiring for this open role. Okay, now let's move on to technical skills and education. So I definitely recommend that you have a section. You can call it whatever you want. If you just want to say technical skills, I write on my resumes technical skills and proficiencies, because as we know, technology is everywhere. And for most jobs, many jobs, certainly, I shouldn't say most, but well, probably as most, there is a need for you to be proficient in some basic software, right? Or the ability to learn basic software programs or systems. So you definitely want to highlight some things here, and I'll talk about that in detail in a moment. And then as far as education goes, again, for more experienced candidates, I want you to know that if you have more than 15 years of work experience, you can remove the year, because at that point, the company, the employer is really looking at your work experience. They're no longer concerned about when you graduated, and probably your experience within 15 years is still going to have dates attached. You just don't have to call it out. But once you hit 20 years, for sure, remove that graduation year from your resume. So again, you don't get potentially discriminated against based on your age. So here's where those sections reside, like I said. And by the way, something else that's really important for everybody here to know is that resume length should be 2 pages or less. So again, this really speaks to the fact that you do need to edit. You do need to be thoughtful about what you include and about what you don't include on your resume. I have done resumes for senior vice presidents, for group presidents. I just wrote up something for a CEO. They are not more than 2 pages. Again, remember, it's very hard for me, if I was a hiring manager, to ingest too much information. And so just because you put more information on the page doesn't mean that it's going to be impactful to the end reader and user. So let's take a look now at this section and zoom in on it. So technical skills and proficiencies, this is really just basic software programs. So for most people, this is going to just say Microsoft Office Suite. Maybe G Suite, which is the Google suite of products, right? Like Google Docs or Google Sheets or Google Drive, right? Some companies and businesses leverage those tools in addition to Microsoft Office. So if you are experienced in them, then you would want to include that too. If you are experienced on Mac operating system, you could include that. And in this case, this woman was a project manager, and Workfront was a specialty project management software, and it's a commonly used one. So we included it here on her resume. But this is not, it's not necessary for you to put every software you've ever used. If it's not applicable to the new role you're going into, don't put it. If it's dated, if it like there was an old contact management program called ACT, ACT. And one of my clients recently had a resume that they gave me that had it on there. And I was like, well, I think that we can take that. I mean, it's not used anymore. It's ancient, Salesforce and all these other softwares have replaced it. So making sure that that information is current is important. So again, less is more. If look at those job requirements for whatever you're applying for. And if they consistently say that a certain thing is required, then by all means, if you have that experience, you want to make sure you highlight it on your resume. And if you don't have that experience or that knowledge, you may want to consider going out and getting it so that you can put it on your resume. And for your education, quite simple, just your school name, the college name, and the degree that you got. And again, for people who are more experienced, no need to put your year there. So there's a couple of optional items that you can have on your resume too. So I talked earlier about having experience, additional experience or additional relevant experience can be a header that you put after all of your other experience. And in this case, I'm showing it with a date because this gentleman was a little younger. He was in his 40s, I believe. But typically, if I was putting additional experience on for, let's say, somebody who's a more experienced candidate, and we didn't want their age to be kind of revealed on the resume, we would just take those years off and leave that alone and just have this title. I recommend additional professional experience. So that's what I would put there after the core professional experience. Similarly, you can have something like volunteer activities, right? So if you feel strongly that you want that on there, it's not required. So again, if you're needing space on your resume, I recommend taking this off. If you have extra space available, this is something that you can certainly choose to include. And then let's talk actually for a moment about education. I'm going to go back for just a quick second. If you do not have a college education, that's okay. If you have any advanced education at all, you still can represent that here on your resume. For example, if you had, I don't know, a couple of years of community college, or several courses you took, you can say coursework in business administration at Harper Community College. Or you could say, it's 3 years of coursework in this, this, and this at these places. I have clients who are quite experienced and some of whom do not have college educations, and that's okay. You don't have to eliminate it if you don't have a degree. If you have any advanced education, I certainly invite you to highlight that on your resume. So with that is everything that I have for you tonight. We blew through it in order to make sure that I left a little time here at the end for questions. But here's the resume template. This is really what you want to be looking at. I thank you so much for joining today. We have a great crowd here, it looks like. And if you do want to reach out on any of this stuff, here's my email address. And I also have a Facebook group that is free to join. And you can search for it on Facebook. It's called Job Search Strategies and Career Coaching for Professionals. Just look for that group and you're welcome to join. We've got a group of over 500 people right now and it's growing every day. And I provide videos, I provide resources for you. So I think I even have that video for the LinkedIn URL in my group. So if that was something you're interested in, that would be an easy place to access it. So with that, I will, I know that Allison will probably join back in. We'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Lynee. And we do have some questions coming in. So our first question tonight is it honest and accurate to change your title? And I'm assuming that the question refers to job title. And is there a professional way to let a prospective employer know that you are changing the title?
It is completely fine. The example I gave earlier is, here's the thing. You as a candidate cannot put yourself at a disadvantage in the marketplace. So if you have an unusual title that will not translate to other companies, it is absolutely acceptable to do so. Like I said, what you cannot do and what would be a problem would be to give yourself a big old promotion. And if you were a marketing manager and then you decide that you're going to be a VP of marketing, that's not okay. But if you are, like I said, like this gentleman's example was, I wish I could remember the title, but he had a bizarre title that just didn't at all relate to project management, but that was his discipline. It's absolutely okay. And then to answer the second part of the question, you don't have to alert the company that you're applying to. There's no need to be worried about this. And by the way, this is a personal choice. If that makes you uncomfortable, please don't do it. This is just my advice when I'm working with my clients one-on-one, and I say that to each and every one of them. I'm like, if you're comfortable with it, here's something we could do that I believe will help you, because this or that just doesn't quite translate in the marketplace. So that's my professional opinion. And since I don't know this person's specific circumstances, I certainly don't want you to do anything you're uncomfortable with. But I definitely do not recommend that you ever misrepresent your role. But if we're talking about a title change for clarity's sake, that's absolutely acceptable.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynee. That clears that up. Do you recommend education always be the last thing on your resume? I have always had it as the first thing.
Great question. Yes, I do. You know why? Because that's not the most important thing that the company is evaluating you on. That is kind of a standard layout structure for college age students or college students, for example. Like my son has expected graduation date, or typically what colleges will train the students in is putting your education, your degree first. because you don't have any work experience. So certainly in that circumstance, it makes a whole lot of sense. So when you're coming out of college, that would be the one time when education would be more prominent, because that's going to be allow the employer to see you've just graduated. So your work experience may be, thinner, maybe less, right? But for a professional, nope, the new format would be put that at the end, because again, that professional summary, your key strengths and skills, those are the most impactful and important when a company is evaluating you as a candidate.
Awesome. And do you recommend taking out external affiliations? Would you include those on a resume or take those out?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think maybe they mean professional affiliations.
Mhm. You can absolutely add those. Again, I didn't add in every category that's potential, but I sometimes have, yeah, professional affiliations, or trying to think if that's what I've called it, or, sometimes it's like, leadership roles, whatever, like, it could be professional affiliations and volunteer work. But absolutely, if you have, or professional organizations and a professional membership, whatever it is, professional organizations is probably what I would call it. So if you're a member of a group that is one that again would be relevant to what you're applying for, great, include it. But again, if you're going to run out of space on your resume to include something that may not be directly relevant, don't. But if it's relevant, by all means, professional organizations are a good thing to add.
Thank you. And if you had a 4.0 GPA, do you include that even if you are 20 years out of college?
Yeah, no, and not that far out of college. Again, I think that, we all learned these things in our youth, and it's hard to know what has evolved and changed. But in this case, GPA, they're not worried about that. What a company is worried about, if you have 20 years of experience, is what experience do you bring to the table? That would be something they wouldn't consider, right? That wouldn't be a decision point for them. They're going to be much more concerned about and interested in, I should say, what skills do you bring? What results and accomplishments have you driven in prior roles that make you an intriguing and attractive candidate for them?
Wonderful, thank you. I'm actually going to try and combine a couple of questions because I think they all are interrelated. How would you include dates if you are furloughed and then laid off? And does COVID need to be mentioned as a
Hmm.
cause for current unemployment if there's a gap?
Yep. Okay, so it'll depend. The couple things will depend. So depending on how long you've been off, right? Again, COVID is really unprecedented, right? What we're dealing with is unprecedented. So I will tell you what the previous rule of thumb was, because for a period of time I did work at an outplacement agency where we provided support and assistance to individuals who had been laid off by a company and who were given some job search support services. And the rule of thumb there was, if you were just laid off, last week, you don't need to put an end date on your resume or on LinkedIn right away. You can't, it's your option. Again, your options are as follows. You could, if you choose to, say you're done working there. But if you prefer, you can just leave it open-ended and leave it like leave it to present, like you're still there. Typically, the rule of thumb was that after 90 days, you needed to do something. Again, I don't know that that would apply in COVID times, because this is, again, very unprecedented in terms of circumstances, and that many employers know that people are out of work for longer period of times because of this, because there are fewer jobs in the marketplace. So in today's world, it won't be counted against you, right? Nobody's going to look at somebody who got laid off due to COVID and make any kind of a negative assumption about that individual. So, and as far as mentioning COVID on your resume, that is also a personal choice. I don't necessarily put it down for people, but again, if they want to, they're certainly welcome to. Some people feel better about calling that out and saying, laid off due to COVID. In some cases, like if they were only in a job for a short amount of time. I mean, I do know people who had just gotten hired in November or in January, right, and got laid off shortly thereafter. And they wanted to make it known, right, this wasn't a performance thing, this was due to COVID. And that's perfectly fine. So I think use your best judgment based on how you feel about that. If you do need to put an end date, or if you feel like you've been out of work for too long, one other suggestion, one thing that you can do is kind of, say that you can kind of create like your own business, but you don't have to go through all the formality of that. You can, if you're doing any kind of consulting, even with friends or family, even if you don't, necessarily get any business, but you're trying to, you can say like that you've got, like a woman I worked with from Crate and Barrel like over a year ago. She had a design service. She wasn't actively working in it, but she was trying to get business in it. So that went on her resume while she was looking for work, because she wanted to feel like I look like I don't want it to be like I'm not doing anything. I am doing something design related in her case. So again, very personal choice, because there is a business designation that's called a sole proprietorship. You do not even need to file paperwork for that. So you could, again, create a, Lynee Alves Consulting, or Lynee Alves Accounting Services, or Lynee Alves Sales Consulting, whatever it is. And again, doesn't even mean that you have to have business necessarily, but if you feel better about kind of saying, hey, I'm working with people, or I'm doing some freelance consulting and helping other people with their XYZ, that's something else you can employ there if you want. But again, you don't need to. I do think that right now employers are very, very aware that people are going to be out of work for, unfortunately, in some cases, more extended periods of time due to COVID, and due to the, the fact that there are fewer jobs in the marketplace than there were 6-8 months ago.
Great, thanks, Lynee. And how would you recommend highlighting in your resume shifts to virtual events?
Hmm. Virtual, like to virtual, like work. Is that what you mean?
I think that's what they mean.
Yeah, I think that for some, I just worked with a gentleman the other day who he's been a remote employee for years and years and years, not because of COVID. And I said to him, I think you should probably highlight this on your resume, because it's an advantage, I think, because some people are newer at this. But you can say, remote employee, right? After the job title, you can just have a comma, remote employee. Let's say the job is based in, I don't know, like, Cincinnati, right? Maybe the company is based in Cincinnati that you work for. Like, it's literally based, you're not working at the Chicago outpost of it, but they're literally based in Cincinnati, but they have people who work remotely here. You can certainly highlight that you're a remote employee. I think that that's a good thing. If you, these days, if you have experience working remote, I think it's something that you can actually work to your advantage.
Great, thank you. And I think I'm just going to take one more question. I know we had a lot of folks writing in questions, but Lynee did give her email address, contact information. So if your question was not answered, please feel free to reach out to her. But our last question for tonight would be, I am retiring and plan to take a job very different than what I have done. How should I organize my resume? And Lynee, I would also just say, for anyone who's changing a career pretty dramatically, is there a different way to format the resume?
Not necessarily. I mean, maybe in your professional summary, you're going to write something a little bit different, about, where your passions lie or what you're interested in, and relate it. If you're going to be going into something dramatically different, I guess I would wonder, do you need the resume, right? Like, I'm not sure if it's going to be an application process, or if it's just something that you're able to segue into without the need of a resume. But if we're going to assume that you need a resume in order to do this, one key thing is going to be relating your prior experience to what you're looking to do next. Right? So let me use myself as an example, right? I didn't need a resume to start my own business. But if I did, I had spent 29 years in sales, media sales specifically, but sales and sales management. But I also was a recruiting manager for over 20 years. And I was a successful job candidate throughout my entire 29-year career, internally within companies, externally, both ways. So when I started my business, those were the things that I highlighted. right? That I was a 20-year hiring manager. Now, hiring was not the majority of my job. I was a sales manager or a sales director. Like that was 95% of my job, right? I wasn't spending all of my time on recruiting, but I consistently did it for 20 years. I developed tools to become better at it, and I have had a real knack for it. So I highlighted those things and really called attention to them because those are the most relevant things to what I'm doing today, and they absolutely translated. So the most important thing in career pivots and in your positioning, if you're going to be writing a resume that is to reflect what you want to do next, is to understand that you've got to be thoughtful about highlighting and pulling out those things that are very relevant from the old work that you did and will translate well into the new type of work you're planning to do or pursue.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lynee. And this was a really wonderful and informative masterclass. It is always a pleasure to hear you speak on these topics. And thank you everyone tonight for joining us. And as I said in my introduction, we've got a lot of great programs at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library. Please hop on over to our website, ahml.info, to see what we have to offer. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.